What's up, guys? Bandwagon Sports. This is Aiden. In this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be going over two main topics. One being the Bryce Young videos that have just recently surfaced. That's going to be the first one we get into. And then the second one is the college football betting odds for teams to win the national championship. Bryce Young recently has had some of his first few NFL practices, and there are some videos from these practices that show him being incredibly tiny. There are videos of him like walking behind his O-line and you can't even see him, and there's a video of him like rolling out, doing a play action, and him just looking multiple feet shorter than all of the players that are on the team, especially the O-line. And I get that the O-line they're supposed to be the biggest players on the field, or some of the biggest players on the field, but they aren't supposed to be a foot or more taller than everybody else. And I think this really shows. I don't think that measurements, like combine measurements and all that kind of stuff, can truly show how small Bryce Young is, because there have been people saying without shoes on he's more like a 5'8", 5'9". I know he measured in at like 5'9", 5'10" at the combine, I'm pretty sure. And he's short. He's really short for an NFL quarterback. The point I'm trying to get to is that despite him being so incredibly short, I do not believe that this will hinder his game at all. There's so many quarterbacks that I can name. There's a couple off of the top of my head, like Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, who coming out of college, these guys are talking about how they're too small, they can't see over the line. And Drew Brees and Russell Wilson both won Super Bowls. Drew Brees is going to be a Hall of Famer. Russell Wilson is a good quarterback. Kyler Murray's still a lot to prove, but that's besides the point. Those are three quarterbacks who have made it and are starting were starting in the NFL for multiple years, who were all said to be short coming out of college. Again, the point I'm trying to get to is that this will not affect Bryce Young. We've seen him play in college. We've seen the numbers he puts up. We've seen how incredible he is against extremely tough defenses. 2021 SEC championship game against Georgia. If you can surround him with decent or great weapons, there's no telling what Bryce Young can do. Bryce Young could have one of the greatest careers in the NFL. He could. Realistically, he could. Because he has all the talent, all the potential in the world. And the only thing that people can find to knock on him is his height. Clearly the NFL teams aren't worried about it, because he went number 1 in the NFL draft. And if he wouldn't have gone number 1, he would have gone number 2 or 3. So clearly, and the NFL guys are the experts, the guys that know everything about everybody that there is to know about. These guys know people. And they've seen tons of talent come through and through. They've been around the game. If they're not worried about the height, if they aren't worried about how small or his ability to see over the line, I don't think we should either. Because, once again, he went number 1 overall for a reason. Because he is extremely talented and he is a really, really good football player. No matter, people can say what you want, people can post what they want. There is nothing that anyone can say that can take away from the fact that Bryce Young is going to be a good, solid NFL quarterback. All right, now moving into the second topic, we have these betting odds. There's a couple. I'll make sure to put up a list in the YouTube video of this, but the betting odds right now, in my opinion, obviously number 1, Georgia. There's not a team who has the roster that Georgia has. Nobody within the past 2-3 years has recruited like Georgia. Nobody has had the development that Georgia has, and nobody has had the success that Georgia has in the past 2, 3, 4 years. There's not a team in college football that has had quite the same success as Georgia has had in these past couple years. So Georgia, they're number 1. They're plus 225. I can't. There's no arguing for number 1. I can't see anyone but Georgia being at number 1. And at number 2 on this list, they have Alabama. This is not my favorite choice for number 2. There are a couple teams that I would put higher than Alabama because, quite frankly, the only thing that kept Alabama in contention for anything last year, the only player that kept Alabama in contention for any SEC championship, playoffs, bowl games was Bryce Young. Bryce Young was the only player that kept Alabama somewhat close to being in the SEC championship, in the playoffs. Bryce Young is the only reason they won games last year. There are two or three games that Alabama won that they would have lost last year if they did not have Bryce Young. Now, losing Bryce Young and Jalen Milroe was supposed to be really good. Was it Ty Simpson? Was supposed to be really good. And going through I know it's a spring game. Nobody cares about the spring game. But just looking at the spring game, watching film from spring games, spring practices, Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson do not look like Alabama caliber quarterbacks. Since 2015, Alabama has had a tier of quarterbacks that has been on a whole nother level. None of them may have won Heisman's or whatever the nation's best quarterback is. They might not have won that. However, Alabama's quarterbacks Jalen Hurts, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Tua, who's a pretty darn good quarterback, if you ask me. Mac Jones, who's starting for the Patriots. And Bryce Young, who just went number 1 in the draft. There hasn't been a quarterback room that has been sustained like that other than arguably Oklahoma's. There's no other team other than Alabama and maybe Oklahoma who has kept a quarterback room at such a high level of talent for such a long period of time. That's 8 years of having first-round quarterbacks starting on your team. And at one point, they had Jalen Hurts, Tua, and Mac Jones, who all three were first-round NFL draft picks, all of which are now starting in the NFL. And point being, Alabama, they do not have a good quarterback anymore. Tyler Buckner just committed to them. And I don't see why they would need to go after Tyler Buckner if they were not in need of a quarterback spot. And if Notre Dame, not a good program. Tyler Buckner wasn't starting for that not very good program. So for Alabama to be as prestigious and as high level talent as they are supposed to be, for them to be bringing in Tyler Buckner to play games for them is an all new low that I've seen personally for Alabama. Now, I'm not saying they can't develop Tyler or Jerome Simpson or Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson. I'm not saying they can't develop those guys, and I'm not saying those guys are bad, but they are not on the level of Bryce Young, Mac Jones, Tua, or Jalen Hurts that we've seen Alabama be successful with. Ohio State is another team like Alabama. They just lost their best quarterback that they've had in the past however many years. And I just can't get the fact that they're at number 3. When the past 2 years, they've lost to the team whose odds are 4th, Michigan. And these games weren't close. Like, Michigan has won both games by 2 or more possessions. And Michigan hasn't lost as much talent as Ohio State. Michigan hasn't lost as much talent as Alabama. That's because when they started, Michigan, they're in their 3rd year of being decent, of being a pretty good football program. And all of those guys, most of those guys that were in their first year were freshmen or sophomore. And they still have their eligibility remaining, and they're coming back, and they are hungry. They are tired of losing, especially in that college football playoff game. They're tired of losing, and I don't see how they could be number 4 behind Ohio State and Alabama, who are both currently without quarterbacks. So, in my personal opinion, the top 4 should be Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, and then, honestly, I'm probably putting LSU or Clemson, USC at 4, because Alabama, right in this very moment, they don't have the same firepower that they're used to having. Like, they had multiple first, second round receivers in one receiving room. This just the wide receiver development that this Alabama program has had over the past couple years has been insane. And for them to bring in, they just don't have any wide receiver talent. Or they don't have as much wide receiver talent as they are used to having. They still have some. They don't have a lot, but it is some. I would put USC over Alabama. Okay, USC's at 5, LSU 6, Florida State and Clemson are tied for 7. Penn State 8. Texas, Tennessee, Notre Dame tied for 9th. Oregon at 10. Washington at 11. And Utah at 12. I don't understand how Utah can be that much lower than USC. USC's defense is atrocious. Is in my opinion, one of the worst in college football. And they're sitting at the 5th rank, the 5th best odds to win the national championship. I don't see how they're higher than Utah. Utah's down at plus 6,000 and USC's at plus 1,600. There is no way that USC should be that high in these rankings because their defense is horrible and they do not show up to big games. They pooped the bed against Tulane. They lost 2 times to Utah last year. Twice in the same year. And that is incredible. It is incredibly hard to beat the same team twice in the same season. But Utah did it. And in that Pac-12 championship game, that was a blowout of a game. It was not close. The entire game, if you watched it, you're thinking Utah is in control and you're thinking Utah's winning it. I just don't understand how USC can be that high. I don't understand the hype around USC. Caleb Williams, he is amazing. I'm not taking anything away from him. Lincoln Riley, great offensive mind. In my opinion, he is not built for the head coach position. He is a way better OC than a head coach. He's way better as an OC. And he should leave the defense to someone who knows what they're doing. Like I said, LSU is at 6 and Florida State at 7. I could see both of them being tied, LSU and Florida State. Because if you guys remember week 1 last season, LSU and Florida State battling it out, 21-20, blocked field goal, or blocked PAT at the end of the game. Florida State wins. That was a big game. And this year, also in week 1, they are playing again. I am so excited for that matchup, and I'll be watching that entire game because that game is huge for the rest of both of their seasons. Both of them need to win that game as much as the other one does. They need to win the game. Both teams need to win the game in order for their playoff hopes or just conference title hopes to stay alive. They both need those. Clemson, over the past couple of years, I don't understand how they are, 8 or 7? I don't understand how they're this high. Their defense still as good as ever, but their offense is not on the same level that it used to be. I don't get why they're so high. I mean, they last year made the Orange Bowl, got crapped on by Tennessee. We don't got to talk about it, but Clemson is just, they're way too high for me in these rankings. Penn State, they are a team that I was extremely high on last year. And watching the Ohio State and the Michigan game with them last year, both of those games were very winnable for Penn State, especially the Ohio State game. It got so out of hand in the last 8 minutes, 8 minutes of the fourth quarter. It got so out of hand, but Penn State was right in it till the very end of the game, where they gave up 3 costly turnovers right at the end of the game. Again, I'm coming into this season, same hype for Penn State. Penn State, if they beat either Ohio State or Michigan this year, I could see them making, honestly, if they can beat one or the other, and a couple things go their way, I could see Penn State winning the Big Ten, and making the college football playoff. This team has incredible potential. I love everything about this team. Drew Aller he's for the first time in forever, Sean Clifford is not the starting quarterback for Penn State. But Drew Aller's supposed to be really good. I'm really excited to see what he does. I love everything about his game. And I'm really high on them. And then Texas, Tennessee, and Notre Dame. Texas and Tennessee are two teams that, again, like Penn State, I was really high on them last year. I had a lot of hope for both of those teams last year. And this year, same thing. Good returning quarterback play for both teams. Joe Milton and Quinn Ewers, and both of them are getting huge 5-star quarterbacks in Arch Manning and Nico Imaleva. Both teams are going to be able to develop those guys. But Tennessee is a couple things away from making the college football playoff last year. A couple things didn't go their way. It was, but it wasn't their fault. Ball didn't bounce in their direction. Happens sometimes. Texas, if Steve Sarkisian does not win at least 10 to 11 games this year, I could see him gone, because Texas is over their history is used to being high in the rankings, and they're used to being a bunch of wins, competing for national titles. In the past couple of years, Texas has not been doing that. Last year, a little bit better. It's slow and steady improvement is what I'm looking for. And I think that Texas is going to they're going to take a big step forward from where they were last year. And I think they're going to make a push for the CFP. And then after Tennessee and Texas, they are tied with Tennessee and Texas. But Notre Dame, in my opinion, a absolute disgrace of a football program. One of, if not the most overrated football program over the past 10, 15 years in all of college football. They are so overrated. None of their teams are ever any good. And when they should not ever be placed, they should not be allowed to be back in the top 15 of CFP rankings ever again. Because we've seen what happens when they are in the playoff, and we've seen what happens when they play teams who are actually good and who aren't in cupcake conferences. They cannot compete with teams who aren't in the cupcake conferences. We saw it last year. They lost 5 games? Last year, 4 or 5 games? That's a lot of games to lose for a team to be so prestigious and so high in these betting odds. Notre Dame does not deserve to be in the top 15, 20 of any rankings ever, because they are that fraudulent. They are that overrated and overhyped every year. And I'm giving Notre Dame a ton of shade right now, but they deserve all of it. Notre Dame is one of the worst programs in the country, and there's nothing you can do to convince me otherwise. Before I get too heated about Notre Dame, I'm going to wrap this up, and I'll see you guys in the next one.